The Bosphorus Strait is 19 miles long and 3/4 of a mile wide at its narrowest point. Under the 1936 Montreux Convention, military vessels of non-Black Sea states are restricted in their ability to transit the strait, while military vessels of Black Sea states, including Russia, have passage rights subject to certain conditions. Aircraft are not subject to the same restrictions. A Russian military aircraft can legally overfly the Bosphorus in international airspace, descend over the Turkish mainland where Turkey permits overflight, and enter the Black Sea in approximately 40 minutes at cruise speed. This legal framework is not relevant to the conduct of the aircraft once it is over the Black Sea. Once over open water in international airspace beyond the territorial limits of Turkey, Romania, Bulgaria, Ukraine, and Georgia, a Russian aircraft is operating in a space that belongs to no single jurisdiction and is policed by NATO's collective air defense architecture and the national air forces of the Black Sea states, states that are not all NATO members and that maintain varying levels of interoperability with the alliance's command and control systems. The Neptune 10 gas platform is a civilian energy infrastructure asset located in Romanian exclusive economic zone waters, approximately 170 kilometers east of the Constanta coast, in a depth of water that places it 160 kilometers from the nearest Romanian Air Force Quick Reaction Alert Base at Mihail Cogălnicianu. It has been operational since 2018 and represents a significant portion of Romania's domestic natural gas production capacity. It is staffed by 68 crew on rotating shifts, supported by helicopter transfers from the mainland twice weekly. It is not a military installation. It carries no defensive systems. Its operations center monitors the surrounding sea and airspace on commercial radar and maintains communication with Romanian maritime authorities on standard civil frequencies. It is exactly the kind of target that a state actor contemplating gray zone coercive pressure against a NATO member would study. At 7:22 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, the NATO Combined Air Operations Center at Torrejon received an automated alert from the sentry assigned to Black Sea air policing. A single contact, bearing 005 from Sinop on the Turkish Black Sea coast, climbing through 8,000 feet at speed 410 knots, heading 012 northeast toward the Romanian EEZ. The contact was 280 kilometers south of the Romanian coast. Its Mode 3 transponder was squawking a code that the CAOC's identification database matched to a previous Su-24 Fencer intercept in this theater from 14 months earlier. The match was not confirmed by IFF return. The transponder code was a 4-digit squawk that the previous Su-24 had also used, which was either a coincidence of sequential code assignment or a deliberate reuse of a known code to create identification ambiguity. At 410 knots and the current heading, time to the Neptune 10 platform's position, 41 minutes. The tactical picture the CAOC was assembling in the following 90 seconds contained 3 elements that were each independently explicable as benign and collectively consistent with a profile that was not. First, the Su-24 had exited Turkish airspace over the Black Sea coast without notifying Turkish air traffic control of its exit. It had simply ceased responding to Ankara's radar picture and appeared on the sentry's display at 8,000 feet over open water. Aircraft transiting the Turkish coast routinely close out with Turkish ATC before entering Black Sea airspace. This aircraft had not. Second, the Su-24's heading of 012 degrees from its current position did not lead to any Russian naval installation, any designated military exercise area, or any flight information region waypoint consistent with a transit to Russia's Black Sea coast. It led northeast into the Romanian EEZ, toward the area where the Neptune 10 platform was the most significant fixed structure in that bearing for 200 kilometers. Third, the Su-24 was carrying external stores. The sentry's passive infrared overlay at this range was not resolving specific store types, but the thermal mass distribution on both wing pylons was consistent with loaded stations. An unloaded ferry configuration on a Su-24 produces a different pylon thermal signature than a loaded strike configuration. The sentry's passive assessment, loaded pylons, inboard stations, type unconfirmed, loaded, heading 012, 41 minutes from the Neptune 10 platform. The CAOC passed the contact to the F/A-18E section, holding CAP station 140 nautical miles west of the Neptune 10 platform at 7:23 a.m. The section had been on station for 93 minutes. 2 aircraft, standard Black Sea air policing configuration. The CAOC also passed the contact to the Romanian Air Force duty officer at Mihail Cogălnicianu, who scrambled a single F-16C at 7:24 a.m. At 7:24 a.m., the CAOC issued the ROE clarification request that the tactical picture had made necessary. The Neptune 10 platform was a civilian energy infrastructure asset. The applicable law of armed conflict distinguished between military objectives and civilian objects, with civilian objects protected from intentional attack. Absent a showing that they had been converted to military use or that their destruction offered a concrete military advantage, the Neptune 10 platform had not been converted to military use. Whether its destruction offered Russia a concrete military advantage was a legal and political judgment that existed above the operational level. The ROE that governed the F/A-18E section's engagement authority for this contact did not include an explicit authorization for force against an aircraft that had not yet committed a hostile act. The applicable authorization was the same one that governed every intercept in this theater: ordnance-free on confirmed hostile act, deterrent action permitted on weapons employment preparation. The question the CAOC's ROE clarification was attempting to answer: did an armed aircraft on a bearing toward a civilian structure constitute ordnance employment preparation under the applicable framework? The answer came back in 11 minutes, which was 11 minutes the geometry was consuming at 410 knots. The answer was carefully worded and operationally insufficient. A bearing toward a civilian structure does not independently constitute a hostile act. If fire control radar activation occurs, that constitutes ordnance employment preparation. If ordnance release is confirmed, that is a hostile act. Prior to those events, deter and observe. Deter and observe. The FA-18E section led processed the guidance and began the intercept. At 7:27 a.m., range to the Su-24, 89 nautical miles. The AN/APG-79 AESA radar on the lead F/A-18E was tracking the contact at 89 nautical miles in medium PRF search mode, the return consistent with an Su-24 class airframe. The pylon stores were not resolvable at this range with confidence. The Su-24's own radar, a NIIP terrain-following radar in search mode, was active, confirmed by the EW suite's emission characterization, not fire control mode, terrain-following search mode, the kind of radar operation a crew uses when preparing for a low-altitude ingress rather than when making a transit at 8,000 feet over open water. An aircraft at 8,000 feet over water has no terrain to follow. Terrain-following radar activation in this geometry was either a pre-mission warm-up of the system for a subsequent low-altitude phase or an inadvertent mode activation that the crew had not corrected, or a deliberate omission designed to suggest a low-altitude ingress was planned without actually committing to one. All three interpretations were available. The EW suite recorded the emission character with precision. The intelligence value of the recording was not the question at 7:27 a.m. The tactical question was, at 7:29 a.m., the Romanian F-16C reached intercept altitude at 16,000 feet, bearing 009 from the contact, range 61 nautical miles. The F-16 had climbed fast, using its F-110 engine's power-to-weight advantage to compress the intercept timeline. The Romanian pilot had a clear picture from the CenturyLink 16 data and was building his own APG-68 radar track simultaneously. The Su-24 was now between the F/A-18E section to its west-southwest and the Romanian F-16 to its south-southwest. Not flanked in the military sense, neither aircraft was in a geometry that would be described as advantaged in an aerial engagement. But the contact was aware, or should have been aware, that it was being tracked from two bearings. At 7:31 a.m., something changed. The Su-24 descended. Not gradually. A 2,500 feet per minute rate of descent, nose pitching down from its 8,000-foot cruise altitude toward the sea surface. The descent profile was abrupt enough that the EW suite's passive picture registered an afterburner signature from the Su-24's AL-21F engines simultaneously with the descent initiation. The pilot had pushed both throttles to maximum power as the nose dropped, the combination of power and descent angle producing an acceleration that the radar track registered as a speed increase from 410 knots to 490 knots in 22 seconds. At 490 knots, descending through 4,200 feet, heading 012 toward the Neptune 10 platform 34 nautical miles ahead. The descent and acceleration changed the tactical picture in a way that the ROE guidance had been specifically designed to address. A loaded aircraft descending toward a civilian target at accelerating speed with its terrain-following radar active was not ambiguously consistent with benign intent. The deter and observe authorization became operationally inadequate. At the moment, the aircraft began a high-speed descent profile toward the only significant structure on its bearing within engagement range. The F/A-18E lead activated the AN/APG-79 at full fire control power at 7:31 a.m. and 21 seconds. Single target track. Range 71 nautical miles. The fire control solution beginning to build at full power. The Su-24's N019 radar warning receiver registered the APG-79 emission immediately. The RWR tone in the Su-24 cockpit would be a sustained fire control track from the west-southwest from an aircraft the Su-24 crew had not resolved on their own sensors. The Su-24 did not level out. It continued descending through 3,800 feet. The Romanian F-16 activated its own APG-68 in fire control mode at 7:31 a.m. and 48 seconds, 27 seconds after the F/A-18E. Second fire control track from the south-southwest, simultaneous with the first. The Su-24 was now being tracked from two bearings by two different radar systems in fire control mode. Its RWR was receiving two simultaneous fire control tones. The Su-24 leveled at 3,200 feet at 7:32 a.m. and 7 seconds, not at sea surface, not continuing the descent. A level off at 3,200 feet, speed still 490 knots, heading unchanged at 012. The aircraft had stopped descending and was now flying level at an altitude that was still far above any sea-skimming ingress profile but significantly below its cruise altitude. The terrain-following radar was still active. The pylon stores were still loaded. The Su-24 pilot had received two simultaneous fire control tracks and had arrested his descent. He had not turned. He had not reduced power. He was at 3,200 feet, 490 knots, heading toward the Neptune 10 platform at approximately 23 nautical miles. At this speed and distance, the platform was 2 minutes and 49 seconds away. The F/A-18E leads fire control solution on the Su-24, 81% confidence. Valid, AIM-120D solution green. The Romanian F-16 solution, transmitted through the CenturyLink 16 picture, 78%, valid. The CAOC's ROE guidance had said, fire control radar activation constitutes ordnance employment preparation. The Su-24's own terrain-following radar had been active since before the descent. It had not activated a fire control mode specific to the KH-25 or KH-29 air-to-surface missiles that the Su-24's pylon stores might contain. Without a fire control radar activation for the specific ordnance, the hostile act threshold was technically not met under the most restrictive interpretation of the guidance. The geometry was consuming the time available for that distinction to matter. At 7:32 a.m. and 19 seconds, the FA-18E lead transmitted on guard. Russian military aircraft, bearing 012, altitude 3,200 feet. You are approaching a civilian energy infrastructure asset in Romanian exclusive economic zone. You are being tracked by NATO aircraft in fire control mode from 2 bearings. This is a civilian asset. Alter course immediately. This is your final advisory. The transmission was in English. It specified the Neptune 10's status as civilian. It communicated the double lock without ambiguity. It gave the Su-24 crew the maximum possible information to make a decision before the decision was made for them by the geometry. The Su-24 crew's response came in 14 seconds. The Su-24 rolled left.
Not a hard defensive break. A coordinated bank, 30 degrees, nose pulling west. The roll was smooth and the rate of bank consistent with a deliberate maneuver rather than a reactive one. The speed did not reduce immediately. 490 knots maintained through the turn, the aircraft's energy state preserved. But the nose was turning away from heading 012, away from the Neptune 10 platform's bearing. The turn continued through 60 degrees of heading change before the bank relaxed and the aircraft stabilized on heading 332.
Heading 332 from the contact's current position, northwest. Back toward Turkey. Back toward the Bosphorus. At 7:32 a.m. and 48 seconds, the Su-24 was heading 332 at 3,200 feet, speed 490 knots. Range to the Neptune 10 platform, 22 nautical miles, an opening as the heading change put distance between the contact and the platform. The fire control solutions on both NATO aircraft remained green. The Su-24's terrain-following radar transitioned to standby at 7:33 a.m. and 12 seconds. The first friction event in the engagement had occurred simultaneously with the Su-24's descent. The Romanian F-16's AN/AP G68 radar had dropped the Su-24 contact for 6 seconds during the descent phase due to sea surface clutter at the aircraft's rapidly decreasing altitude. At 3,200 feet over the Black Sea, with the APG-68's look-down geometry, the radar's clutter rejection algorithm had briefly classified the Su-24 as a surface vessel due to its radar cross-section profile and its proximity to the sea surface. The 6-second dropout had not affected the F/A-18E's track, which had maintained continuity through the AN/APG-79's superior clutter rejection capability. The Romanian pilot had noted the dropout, cross-referenced the Link 16 picture from the Sentry, and maintained his fire control solution using the Sentry's corroborating track for those 6 seconds. Operationally manageable. Documented as a system limitation for future mission planning. The second friction event was the ROE guidance response time. 11 minutes for the CAOC to answer a question whose operational consequence was accruing at 410 knots throughout those 11 minutes. The Su-24 had covered 74 nautical miles during the 11-minute clarification window. 11 minutes was the time it would have taken for the contact to be 63 nautical miles from the Neptune 10 platform if it had maintained its original cruise altitude. At the cruise altitude, the fire control activation trigger, hostile act, would not have been available until the aircraft was at close range. The descent profile had given the geometry both a clearer hostile intent indicator and a compressed timeline. The The debrief ran 2 hours and 51 minutes. It was attended by NATO CAOC representatives, the Romanian Air Force liaison, and a separate legal review officer whose role was specific to the civilian infrastructure targeting question. The first finding was operational. The dual fire control lock, 2 NATO aircraft from 2 bearings, had produced a heading reversal in 14 seconds from the guard transmission. The same aircraft, from a single bearing with a single fire control lock, might not have produced the same response in the same time. The geometry of dual coverage from different bearings communicated a tactical situation that the guard transmission then articulated in language. The Su-24 crew had been given no viable option that preserved both their heading and their aircraft. The second finding was the intelligence one. The Su-24's descent profile, the specific combination of 2,500 feet per minute descent rate, simultaneous afterburner activation, and terrain-following radar active, matched a profile documented in USAF Strike School analysis of Su-24 pre-attack profiles against maritime fixed targets. It was not a casual descent. It was a rehearsed approach maneuver that the crew had apparently been briefed to execute and had executed at 7:31 a.m. Whether the approach was the beginning of a full engagement that the fire control locks had interrupted, or a deliberate near-profile demonstration designed to stress-test the NATO response and was always planned to be broken off at this point, was the question the debrief's legal officer flagged as operationally unresolvable from the available data. The question mattered for the same reason the Aegean and Hormuz ambiguities had mattered. If it was a demonstration, the Su-24 crew had collected exactly the response data they needed and had successfully avoided triggering ordnance employment. If it was an interrupted actual profile, ordnance employment had been prevented with 14 seconds to spare. 14 seconds at 490 knots is 3.4 nautical miles. At 22 nautical miles from the Neptune 10 platform at the moment of the heading change, the guard transmission's timing had placed the decision point at a distance that was inside the KH-25's maximum range. Whether the ordnance on the Su-24's pylons was a KH-25, a KH-29, a training round, or an external fuel tank could not be confirmed without physical access to the aircraft. The pylon store's configuration remained unresolved in the intelligence product. The legal review officer's finding was entered into the record without resolution. The applicable law of armed conflict did not provide unambiguous guidance on the use of force against an aircraft whose actions were consistent with pre-attack approach, but that had not activated an ordnance-specific fire control radar. The dual-lock deterrence approach had produced the desired behavioral outcome without requiring the legal question to be answered operationally. The question remained unanswered for the same reason it had entered the debrief. The geometry had moved faster than the legal framework. The recommendation from the legal review officer: update the ROE language for civilian infrastructure approach vectors before the next rotation. Specifically, define the geometry at which a loaded aircraft on a bearing toward a civilian structure at low altitude and high speed constitutes ordnance employment preparation independent of fire control radar activation. The recommendation was filed. The update was pending coordination between the CAOC, the U.S. European Command Legal Office, the Romanian Ministry of Defense, and 2 additional NATO legal review boards. The Neptune 10 platform at 8:30 a.m. was operating normally. Its 68 crew members were proceeding with their work schedule. No emergency had been declared. No public statement had been issued. The platform's operations center had registered unusual air traffic at close range on its own radar display at approximately 7:32 a.m., noted the contact heading away, and logged the observation in the daily operations report under standard protocol. 1 Su-24M, 2 NATO aircraft, 3,200 feet minimum altitude over the Black Sea, 41 minutes from first detection to contact egress, 14 seconds from guard transmission to heading change. Ordnance employed, 0. Platform status, operational. Pylon stores on Su-24, unconfirmed. Hostile act threshold under current ROE, not reached by 0.3 seconds and 3.4 nautical miles. ROE update recommendation, filed pending coordination. The Black Sea at 8 a.m. was gray and overcast. The Neptune 10 platform visible on radar from 180 kilometers in every direction, its automatic identification system transmitting its position, its status, its operational condition, everything a navigator needed to find it, and everything a planner needed to consider it. The Su-24 was over the Bosphorus by 8:45 a.m., squawking its transit code, descending toward Turkish airspace on the standard southbound route.
14 seconds, 3.4 nautical miles. The recommendation was in the queue. The next rotation would begin in 11 days.